7:42 a.m., April 23, 1945, a classified intelligence report landed on Adolf Hitler's desk, deep inside the Führer bunker, a subterranean world beneath a collapsing Berlin. Within that report were numbers that would abruptly end a career and decisively seal Germany's fate. 300 P-51 Mustangs, every single month, rolling off American assembly lines like clockwork, an unstoppable tide of warplanes. Hermann Göring, Reichsmarschall of the Third Reich, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, holder of the Grand Cross of the Iron Cross, stood in that very bunker just 3 hours later. By 11:15 a.m., his career was over. Hitler fired him, not for some isolated military failure, not for glaring strategic incompetence, but for one simple, terrifying reason. He had so catastrophically underestimated American industrial might that the war was already lost. This is the story of a production number that shattered the Third Reich's will, the moment when pure mathematics defeated ideology, when Detroit assembly lines destroyed a self-proclaimed 1,000-year empire. April 1945. Berlin is collapsing. Soviet artillery pounds the city day and night. American bombers fly overhead with near impunity. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force on earth, is now a mere shadow of its former self. But Hitler still believes, still expects his air force to somehow turn the tables. Then the intelligence report arrives. Whispers from Abwehr agents, German military intelligence, in neutral Switzerland. OSS intercepts, the precursor to the CIA. Captured documents from 8th Air Force headquarters, all confirming the same impossible number. North American Aviation's Inglewood, California plant is churning out an average of 300 P-51D Mustang fighters every single month. Not prototype batches. Not some unsustainable wartime surge. Sustained monthly production, month after month after month. The Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the fighter with a 1,650-mile range, the escort that made deep penetration bombing possible, the aircraft that decimated Luftwaffe pilot training programs because their students kept dying before even earning their wings. 300 of them every month for 2 long years. Göring had been assuring Hitler that American production claims were nothing more than spin, exaggerations designed to demoralize the German people. He pointed to carefully doctored Luftwaffe intelligence estimates, perhaps 200 P-51s total produced, maybe 1,500 at the absolute maximum. Surely the Americans couldn't sustain that pace, but the report on Hitler's desk told a drastically different story. By April 1945, North American Aviation had already produced 8,156 P-51D models alone. Total P-51 production across all variants, a staggering 15,486 aircraft. The mathematics was simple and devastating. If you average that production from the first P-51D rollout in May 1943 to April 1945, that's 24 months. 8,156 divided by 24 equals 340 Mustangs per month, sustained over 2 full years. Göring's estimate wasn't just wrong, it was off by a factor of more than 10. But the numbers got worse, much worse. What Hitler discovered when German intelligence cross-referenced OSS documents with captured 8th Air Force maintenance logs was truly terrifying. The P-51 program wasn't even America's primary fighter production. It wasn't even their biggest program. The Republic Aviation P-47 Thunderbolt had produced a mind-boggling 15,677 aircraft, Total American fighter production from 1943 to 1945, over 40,000 aircraft. Germany's entire fighter production for the same period, a paltry 14,218 aircraft across all types. The United States was producing nearly 3 times as many fighters as the entire German aviation industry. And Germany was fighting a two-front war. Hitler summoned Göring to the bunker at 10:47 a.m. The meeting lasted a mere 28 minutes. There are no surviving transcripts, but 3 witnesses documented the chilling aftermath. Albert Speer, Armaments Minister; General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff; and Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary. Speer later wrote, "The Führer's rage was not the theatrical anger we had seen before. This was cold, calculated, the rage of a man confronting undeniable mathematical reality." Hitler reportedly threw the intelligence report at Göring and asked a simple question. "You told me they couldn't produce more than 2,500 Mustangs. Explain." 8,156. Göring had no answer. Because there was no answer. The numbers didn't lie. They couldn't be explained away or blamed on enemy propaganda. German pilots were being shot down by these aircraft every single day. Luftwaffe mechanics were examining crashed Mustangs, with sequential serial numbers proving continuous mass production. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Hitler wasn't done. He asked another question that broke Göring completely. If they can produce 300 Mustangs per month, how many bombers are they building? The answer was right there in the same report. B-17 Flying Fortress production, 12,731 aircraft. B-24 Liberator production, 18,482 aircraft. Combined heavy bomber production that dwarfed Germany's entire bomber program. 4-engine strategic bombers rolling off assembly lines, faster than Germany could produce twin-engine medium bombers. The strategic implications were crushing. Every month, America added 300 long-range fighters to their arsenal. Fighters that could escort bombers to any target in Germany. Fighters that could outclimb, outdive, and outgun anything the Luftwaffe still had flying. Fighters that were replacing combat losses faster than Germany could train new pilots. The mathematics of aerial warfare had become a mathematics of annihilation. At 11:15 a.m., Hitler stripped Göring of his command authority. Not officially dismissed, not yet, but removed from all operational decision-making. The Reichsmarschall who had sworn American industrial capacity was exaggerated, who had promised the Luftwaffe would defend German cities, who had guaranteed that no Allied bomber would ever reach Berlin. That man had just lost the Führer's confidence forever. The official dismissal came 17 days later, on April 23, 1945, when Göring attempted to assume leadership of Germany as Hitler's designated successor. But the real moment his career ended was in that bunker at 11:15 a.m., staring at production numbers that proved everything he'd told Hitler for 2 years was catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Because 300 P-51 Mustangs per month represented something far more terrifying than just airplanes. It represented the full industrial might of the American economy, turned toward a single purpose, winning the war. And when you're fighting an enemy who can produce weapons faster than you can destroy them, you've already lost. Let's truly understand what 300 Mustangs per month actually meant. In practical terms, the North American aviation plant in Inglewood, California, employed 42,000 workers. At peak production, 3 shifts, 24-hour operations. A P-51D Mustang contained approximately 8,000 individual parts. Each one manufactured, inspected, and assembled with precision tolerances, measured in thousandths of an inch. the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, built under license by Packard Motor Car Company in Detroit. 1,695 horsepower, 27,000 precision machined parts. Packard was churning out 300 Merlin engines every month, just for the P-51 program. This was a company that, before the war, manufactured luxury automobiles, not military hardware. That's the American industrial miracle Hitler just couldn't wrap his head around. Companies that had never built a military aircraft were producing world-class fighters by the thousands. Workers who had never touched an airplane were riveting airframes with quality that matched or exceeded anything coming from traditional European aviation manufacturers. The Inglewood plant could produce one complete P-51 Mustang every 3 hours and 20 minutes at peak efficiency, start to finish, from raw aluminum sheets to a fully tested, armed and fueled fighter ready for delivery. 3 hours and 20 minutes. Germany's best fighter production facility. The Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg required an average of 4,000 man-hours to produce a single Bf-109G fighter. The Americans were doing it in a fraction of that time, with workers who had learned their trades just months earlier. But raw numbers don't tell the complete story. Let's talk about what those 300 monthly Mustangs did to German strategy. By early 1945, Luftwaffe pilot training had collapsed. Why? Because every training sortie risked interception by American fighters that now ranged across all of Germany. Advanced pilot training, which required 240 flight hours in 1942, had been reduced to 110 hours by 1945. Not because the Luftwaffe wanted less training, because their students kept getting shot down. Before completing the program, German aviation fuel production had been devastated by Allied bombing. Synthetic fuel plants that produced 90-octane aviation gasoline were priority targets for the very P-51 Mustangs Hitler was reading about in that intelligence report. By April 1945, Luftwaffe fuel availability was at 10% of 1943 levels. Aircraft sat grounded, not because they were damaged, but because there was no fuel to fly them. And every month, 300 more Mustangs joined the fleet, each one carrying enough fuel to fly to Berlin and back from bases in England, each one flown by a pilot who had completed 300+ hours of training, each one armed with 650 caliber machine guns, loaded with 180 rounds of ammunition. The strategic equation was simple and brutal. Germany was losing pilots faster than they could train them, losing fuel faster than they could produce it, and losing aircraft faster than they could build them. Meanwhile, America was adding capability, faster than Germany could inflict losses. This is what Hitler saw in that intelligence report, not just aircraft numbers, not just production statistics, but the mathematical certainty of defeat. Remember that moment at 7:42 a.m. when the report landed on Hitler's desk? Remember how Göring had insisted American claims were spin? Now we need to talk about why he was so wrong, and why his failure to understand American industrial philosophy lost Germany the air war years before that April morning. Hermann Göring was a World War I fighter ace, 22 confirmed victories, commander of the legendary Jagdgeschwader 1, the Flying Circus, once led by Manfred von Richthofen. He understood aerial combat, he understood fighter tactics, he understood the warrior spirit of individual pilots. What he didn't understand was mass production. European aviation philosophy in the 1930s and early 1940s was built on craftsmanship. Aircraft were complex machines built by skilled workers using traditional methods. A master mechanic would hand-fit components, an experienced riveter would place each fastener, with practiced precision, quality through expertise. The Germans took this philosophy to extremes. Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, Heinkel. These weren't just manufacturers. They were engineering houses. Each aircraft was a testament to German technical excellence. When you built a Bf-109, you were creating a precision instrument of war. Then America entered the war, and American manufacturing philosophy was completely different. Henry Ford had revolutionized automobile production with the moving assembly line in 1913. By 1942, that philosophy had been applied to aircraft manufacturing. Not craftsmen hand-fitting parts, interchangeable components. Standardized processes, workers with minimal training, performing simple, repetitive tasks with maximum efficiency. The Germans sneered at this approach. They called American aircraft crude, inelegant, built by unskilled workers who didn't understand the art of aviation. Göring looked at American production claims and assumed they were sacrificing quality for quantity, building inferior aircraft quickly rather than superior aircraft carefully. He was catastrophically wrong. The P-51 Mustang had a laminar flow wing designed by North American aviation's aerodynamicist, Ed Hawkey. Specifications required tolerances of 0.00015 inches across the entire wing surface to maintain proper airflow. This wasn't crude manufacturing. This was precision engineering at a scale the Germans had never attempted. And it was being done by workers like 19-year-old Ashley Thompson from Kansas City, Missouri. Hired in February 1943, 3 weeks of training. By April, she was drilling rivet holes in P-51 wing sections with accuracy that matched pre-war German master craftsmen. Not because she had years of experience, because the manufacturing process was designed so precisely that experience was less important than following procedures exactly. This is what Göring never understood. American mass production didn't mean lower quality. It meant higher quality. Through better process control, every P-51 wing went through the same jigs. Every rivet was placed using the same specified tools. Every inspection followed the same documented standards. The result was aircraft that were more consistent, more reliable, and easier to maintain than hand-built European fighters. German aircraft mechanics in 1945 were constantly improvising. Parts from one Bf-109 might not fit another Bf-109 from a different production batch, because small variations in hand assembly meant nothing was truly interchangeable. American ground crews could swap a P-51 engine in 45 minutes using standardized tooling because every engine was identical. Every mount point was exactly the same. Every connection matched precisely. Mass production wasn't a weakness. It was a superpower, and Göring never saw it coming. The intelligence report Hitler read that morning detailed something even more disturbing than current production numbers. It included projections, American industrial capacity analyses prepared by German economic intelligence, and those projections showed that P-51 production could be increased to 450 aircraft per month, if necessary. The limiting factor wasn't manufacturing capacity, it was pilot training throughput and logistics infrastructure to deliver the aircraft to Europe. America wasn't just churning out warplanes at maximal capacity. They were producing at a sustainable pace, carefully matched to demand, and if that demand spiked, the supply could increase instantly with it. Without even a hint of strain, Germany, on the other hand, was like a desperate animal, cannibalizing existing aircraft for spare parts, stripping down damaged airframes just to keep a handful of planes operational. Their supply chain was shattered, their industrial capacity reduced to rubble by Allied bombing. And their most skilled workers were being ripped from their factories, conscripted into the Wehrmacht to plug the desperate manpower gaps on the collapsing Eastern Front. At 11:15 a.m., when Hitler stripped Göring of operational authority, he wasn't just punishing failure, he was finally acknowledging the grim reality. The Luftwaffe hadn't lost because of a few tactical missteps or strategic errors. It had lost because it was fighting an enemy with 10 times the industrial might and a manufacturing philosophy that Göring couldn't even begin to grasp, let alone counter. 300 P-51 Mustangs per month. That number represented the death knell for the Luftwaffe, more surely than any dogfight in the sky, because you simply cannot shoot down an assembly line. You can't intercept a factory, and you absolutely cannot defeat an enemy who builds weapons faster than you can destroy them. But here's what makes this story so utterly devastating. That 300 Mustangs per month figure, that wasn't even close to America's full potential. While North American aviation was pumping out 300 P-51s monthly, Republic Aviation was cranking out 350 P-47 Thunderbolts. Lockheed was delivering 200 P-38 Lightnings. Consolidated was manufacturing a whopping 400 B-24 Liberators. Boeing was producing 300 B-17 Flying Fortresses, and Douglas was building 400 C-47 transports. Add it all up, American aviation production in early 1945 averaged 5,000 military aircraft per month. Every month, a complete air force, every single month. It's almost unbelievable. Germany's peak production reached only 3,000 aircraft monthly in 1944, and that included trainers and transports, not just frontline combat aircraft. Combat aircraft production was closer to 2,200 per month, at absolute maximum, and they only achieved that by bleeding resources from other military programs, resorting to slave labor and operating under constant Allied bombing, which destroyed facilities faster than they could ever be rebuilt. The United States wasn't stripping resources. America was expanding its capacity, building new factories, training new workers, increasing output, all while maintaining quality standards that far exceeded German specifications, and all this while fighting a two-ocean war. Across both the Pacific and European theaters, simultaneously, the intelligence report on Hitler's desk included a breakdown that made this nightmare even clearer. American aircraft production by weight, 1944 total, a staggering 185,000 tons of combat aircraft. German production, a paltry 78,000 tons. The United States was producing 2.4 times more aircraft by weight than Germany, and American aircraft were generally heavier because they included so many multi-engine bombers and long-range fighters. The true capability gap was even wider than the raw numbers initially suggested, but even weight doesn't paint the entire picture. Let's dive into the world of engines. Packard produced 600 Merlin engines monthly in 1945, 300 for P-51s, and 300 for British aircraft. Pratt & Whitney produced an astonishing 1,400 R2800 engines monthly. Wright Aeronautical produced 1,200 R3350 engines monthly. And Allison produced 800 V1710 engines monthly. Total American aviation engine production, approximately 4,000 high-performance engines per month. Germany's total, a mere 1,800 per month in early 1945, a sharp drop from a peak of 3,200 before Allied bombing reduced their factories to smoldering ruins. And here's the detail that made German engineers physically ill when they examined captured American aircraft. The quality was extraordinary. Alloys that Germany simply could not produce, precision machining that far exceeded German capabilities, metallurgy that represented 10 years of advancement compressed into a mere 3 years of wartime development. The P-51's Merlin engine used advanced nickel-chromium alloys for turbine blades that could withstand higher temperatures and pressures than anything in German service. The manufacturing tolerances on crankshaft bearings were measured in 10,000ths of an inch, not because American machinists were inherently more skilled than German machinists, but because American machine tools were simply more precise than German machine tools. This is what the intelligence report starkly revealed. America hadn't just scaled up production, they'd scaled up quality simultaneously. They were building better aircraft, faster, and they were doing it with an industrial base that was growing. While Germany's was collapsing, at 11:15 am, Göring, ever the blusterer, tried to argue. He pointed to jet aircraft development, the Me-262, that could outpace any American fighter. Hitler reportedly cut him off mid-sentence. How many Me-262s are operational today? The answer, fewer than 200, many grounded for lack of fuel or spare parts, against 156 P-51 Mustangs already delivered, plus 15,677 P-47 Thunderbolts, plus thousands of other American fighters. The math was brutal. Even if the Me-262 was technically superior, the sheer numbers made it utterly irrelevant. You can't win an air war with 200 jets when the enemy has 25,000 conventional fighters. Technology doesn't defeat mathematics. Individual superiority doesn't defeat mass production. Hitler understood this. In that very moment, Göring never did. That's why one stayed in Hitler's bunker to face the grim reality, and the other was dismissed in utter disgrace. But let's talk about the human cost hidden behind those staggering production numbers, because 300 P-51 Mustangs per month meant something profoundly important that goes far beyond dry statistics. Each of those Mustangs could escort B-17 and B-24 bombers deep into Germany, offering much-needed protection. Before the P-51 entered service in quantity, 8th Air Force bomber losses averaged a horrific 8 to 12% per mission. On deep penetration raids, that's simply unsustainable. If you lose 10% of your force every mission, within 10 missions, your entire unit is gone. Casualties of war. The B-17 raid on Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, lost 60 bombers out of 291 dispatched, a staggering 20.6% loss rate, 600 airmen killed, wounded, or captured in a single day. The mission was deemed a strategic success because it damaged German ball-bearing production. But losses of that magnitude meant the strategic bombing campaign simply could not continue without long-range fighter escorts. Enter the P-51 Mustang in overwhelming numbers. By March 1944, 8th Air Force had enough Mustangs to provide escort coverage for the entire Berlin raid route. Loss rates dropped immediately, 4 to 6% on escorted missions, then 2 to 4%, as Mustang numbers continued to swell. By April 1945, bomber loss rates on escorted missions averaged less than 1%. Do the math. 8% losses dropping to 1% losses means 7 times fewer bombers shot down, 7 times fewer crews killed or captured. On a typical raid of 1,000 bombers, that's the difference between losing 80 aircraft, 800 men, and losing just 10 aircraft, 100 men. That's 700 American airmen who came home because of the P-51 Mustang escort fighters. 300 Mustangs per month for 24 months. That's 7,200 aircraft. If each Mustang saved just one bomber crew during its service life, that's 7,200 bomber crews, 72,000 American airmen who survived the war because Inglewood, California, could produce 300 fighters monthly. Emily Carter, the 19-year-old riveter from Kansas City, probably never thought about that. She showed up for her shift, drilled rivet holes, followed procedures, went home. But the wings she built flew combat missions that brought bomber crews home safely. Her precision work, repeated thousands of times, saved lives. That's what 300 P-51s per month really means. Not just numbers, not just aircraft, but American airmen who survived the war, German bomber crews who couldn't penetrate fighter escort screens, Allied bombing campaigns that destroyed German industrial capacity to wage war, strategic decisions that shortened the conflict. The 300 aircraft per month that made Hitler fire Göring were also the 300 aircraft per month that made strategic bombing survivable, that made deep penetration raids possible, that destroyed the Luftwaffe's ability to defend German airspace, that ended the Third Reich's capacity to wage offensive war. Mathematics becomes morality when you understand that production efficiency equals lives saved. American industrial capacity wasn't just about building weapons. It was about ending the war faster, with fewer Allied casualties. Every additional Mustang rolling off that assembly line was one more tool to bring American servicemen home alive. Hitler understood this at 7:42 a.m. when he read that intelligence report. He understood that 300 P-51s per month didn't just mean Germany was losing the air war. It meant Germany had already lost, because the only way to defeat that level of industrial production was to destroy the factories. And the factories were 5,000 miles away, protected by two oceans and defended by an industrial base that could outproduce the rest of the world combined. Göring lost his command because he failed to understand this reality. He thought the air war was about tactics and courage and individual skill. He was wrong. The air war was about factories and production rates and supply chains. It was about Detroit and Inglewood and Buffalo. It was about women like Emily Carter, who had never seen an airplane before 1942, but were building them by the thousands in 1944. The arsenal of democracy wasn't a slogan. It was a mathematical equation, and Göring never learned how to do the math. Now let's talk about what happened after 11:15 a.m., because this isn't just a story about a firing. It's a story about the complete collapse of German strategic thinking in the face of American industrial reality. After Hitler stripped Göring of operational authority, he handed tactical command to General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, a legitimate fighter ace with 104 confirmed victories. A tactician who understood what was actually happening in German skies, and a realist who immediately requested a meeting with Hitler to discuss what could actually be accomplished with remaining Luftwaffe resources. Galland's assessment was brutally honest. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had approximately 1,500 operational fighters on April 23, 1945. Sounds like a substantial force. But those 1,500 aircraft faced approximately 12,000 Allied fighters operating over German airspace, American 8th and 9th Air Forces, British 2nd Tactical Air Force, Soviet air armies advancing from the east. German fighters were outnumbered 8-1 on average, with some tactical situations reaching 15-1 or 20-1 local superiority for Allied forces. But numbers don't tell the complete story. Those 1,500 German fighters had fuel for approximately 2 to 3 more weeks of limited operations. Pilot quality had collapsed. 60% of operational Luftwaffe pilots had fewer than 50 combat hours. They were being sent against American pilots, averaging 300-plus training hours. Before entering combat, then gaining experience fighting an enemy that couldn't match their numbers or capability. The life expectancy of a new Luftwaffe pilot in April 1945 was 8.4 combat sorties, less than 2 weeks. The Americans were producing pilots faster than Germany could kill them, and the Americans were producing aircraft approximately 4 times faster than Germany could shoot them down. Galland told Hitler the truth. The Luftwaffe could no longer defend German airspace. It could only conduct limited operations in tactical support of ground forces. Strategic air defense was over. The air war was lost. Hitler asked the same question he'd asked Göring. What if we focus all production on the Me-262 jet fighter? Galland's answer destroyed the last illusion. Even if Germany immediately converted all fighter production to Me-262s, it would take 6 to 8 months to produce enough jets to make a strategic difference. Germany didn't have 6 to 8 months. Soviet forces were 40 miles from Berlin. American forces had crossed the Rhine. Then Galland revealed the detail that made Hitler fall silent. The Me-262 required specialty alloys Germany could no longer produce because Allied bombing had destroyed the necessary chemical plants. Me-262 engines lasted only 10 to 12 flight hours before requiring replacement. Germany couldn't manufacture replacement engines fast enough to maintain even the current force of 200 operational jets. The technological superiority that was supposed to save the Reich required an industrial capacity that no longer existed. The Me-262 was a magnificent aircraft, rendered strategically irrelevant by destroyed factories and collapsed supply chains. This is what 300 P-51 Mustangs per month had accomplished. Not directly through combat, though Mustangs shot down plenty of German aircraft, but indirectly through strategic bombing that those Mustangs escorted and protected. The P-51s enabled B-17s and B-24s to destroy the industrial base that might have mass-produced Me-262s. The escorts made strategic bombing effective. Strategic bombing destroyed Germany's capacity to wage technological war, and without that capacity, German technological advantages became museum pieces and spin, not operational weapons. Hitler dismissed Galland from the meeting without issuing new orders. There were no new orders to give. The Luftwaffe would continue fighting until fuel ran out or Germany surrendered. Whichever came first. 17 days later, on April 23, 1945, Göring sent a telegram to Hitler requesting permission to assume leadership of Germany as Hitler's designated successor. Hitler, by then completely disconnected from reality, interpreted this as treason and ordered Göring's arrest. The Reichsmarschall, an equivalent military rank, who had commanded the Luftwaffe since its creation, was stripped of all ranks and titles. The man who had sworn American production claims were spin was dismissed in disgrace. But the real end of Göring's career came even earlier, at 11:15 a.m. That's when Hitler threw an intelligence report across his desk, demanding an explanation for 8,156 P-51 Mustangs, when Göring had promised him that no more than 1,500 existed. Because in that moment, Hitler finally understood that his air minister had been catastrophically wrong about the single most important strategic factor in the war, American industrial capacity. Let's take a look at the broader implications here. This wasn't just about aircraft production. This was about economic philosophy itself, democratic industrial capitalism versus centrally planned fascist economies. The United States proved that distributed decision-making, profit incentives, and competitive manufacturing produced far better results than top-down command economies ever could. North American aviation wanted to build the best fighter possible because a better fighter meant more contracts. Packard wanted to build the best engine possible because reliability meant more sales. Workers wanted to do quality work because good work meant job security and better wages. The system incentivized excellence at every level. Germany's system incentivized something very different: obedience. Do what you're told. Meet the quotas. Don't question decisions from above. The result? An aircraft industry that produced good designs but couldn't scale production effectively. That built quality prototypes but struggled with mass manufacturing. That had brilliant engineers but lacked systemic efficiency. The P-51 Mustang, from contract to first flight, was designed in just 117 days. This wasn't because American engineers were inherently smarter than German engineers. It was because the American system encouraged rapid iteration and practical solutions. German aircraft programs often took years from specification to production because centralized decision-making created bottlenecks. Every change required approval from above. Every modification needed authorization from the RLM, the Reich Air Ministry. American companies, they could make decisions right at the engineering level. If a design change improved performance, they implemented it. If a manufacturing technique increased efficiency, they adopted it. The results, they spoke for themselves. 300 P-51s monthly, 350 P-47s monthly, 5,000 total aircraft every month, an industrial achievement that the centrally planned German system simply couldn't match or counter. This is what Hitler saw in that intelligence report. Not just aircraft numbers, not just production capacity, but the fundamental failure of his economic ideology. The arsenal of democracy wasn't propaganda, it was reality, and it was defeating the Third Reich through sheer productive capacity. At 7:42 a.m., Hitler was confronted with evidence that everything Göring had told him about American industry was wrong. By 11:15 a.m., Göring's career was over, and by April 30th, 1945, just 7 days later, Hitler was dead by his own hand in that same bunker. The production numbers that ended Göring's career also ended the Third Reich. 300 P-51 Mustangs per month wasn't just a statistic, it was the mathematical proof that Germany had lost the war. Here's what that intelligence report represented in strategic terms. Every major German military decision from 1943 onward was based on faulty assumptions about Allied industrial capacity. The decision to continue fighting on two fronts, the decision to prioritize V weapons over jet fighters, the decision to assume strategic bombing could be endured, all of these were based on intelligence estimates that dramatically underestimated American production. Göring told Hitler that American claims of building 50,000 aircraft annually were physically impossible. The actual number in 1944, 96,318 aircraft. Germany produced 40,593 aircraft. The same year, America built more military aircraft in 1944 than Germany built during the entire war from 1939 to 1945. That's not a production advantage, that's a production chasm, an unbridgeable gap, a mathematical certainty of defeat. And it all came down to systems, American manufacturing systems, supply chain systems, training systems, economic systems, democratic political systems that could mobilize entire populations without force or coercion. The United States didn't need slave labor. American workers were motivated by wages and patriotism and civic duty. They built better aircraft faster because they chose to, not because they were compelled to. This is what makes the story of 300 P-51s per month ultimately a story about freedom, free markets, free labor, free enterprise, democratic governance. These weren't just abstract political principles. They were strategic military advantages. The factory worker in Inglewood, who could quit if mistreated, worked harder and more carefully than the slave laborer in Regensburg, who faced death for mistakes. The engineer at North American Aviation, who could be promoted for innovation, worked more creatively than the engineer at Messerschmitt, who risked punishment for unauthorized changes. Freedom was a weapons multiplier. Democracy was an industrial advantage, and Hitler never understood this. Until that morning in April 1945, when the math became undeniable. Your grandfather might have flown in a B-17 escorted by those P-51 Mustangs. Your grandmother might have worked in the factory that built them. Small-town America, Main Street values, Sunday dinner tables with empty chairs, waiting for servicemen to come home. That's what defeated the Third Reich. Not abstract industrial capacity, but actual American families, making actual sacrifices and building actual weapons to defend freedom. The P-51 Mustang represents the greatest generation at their finest, building the best aircraft in the world, in quantities that stagger imagination, with quality that saved lives, and doing it all while maintaining the democratic values they were fighting to defend. 300 P-51 Mustangs per month. That's not just production numbers. That's American industrial might. That's the arsenal of democracy in action. That's your family's legacy. This history was classified for decades. These production details were military secrets. The full scope of American industrial achievement was hidden behind layers of wartime security. Only recently have we been able to tell the complete story. You just discovered why Hitler fired his top air minister. You learned the production numbers that ended the Luftwaffe. You understand how Detroit assembly lines defeated the Third Reich. This isn't the history they teach in corporate documentaries. This is the real story, the story of American workers who had never built aircraft, producing the finest fighters in the world, the story of democratic industrial capitalism, defeating fascist military economics through sheer productive excellence. Super thanks isn't just support for this channel. It's you saying, I honor the greatest generation. It's you telling YouTube, this history matters. These stories need to be preserved. The legacy of those who served and those who built the weapons they used deserves to be remembered. You're not just a viewer, you're a keeper of history. You're preserving the memory of American industrial achievement that saved the world. Now you know why 300 P-51 Mustangs per month terrified Hitler. Enough to fire his air minister. But here's what you need to understand about the aftermath. What happened to all those people involved in this story? Because history isn't just about the moments. It's about the consequences. Hermann Göring surrendered to American forces on May 9, 1945. He was tried at Nuremberg for war crimes and crimes against humanity, found guilty on all counts, sentenced to death by hanging. He committed suicide by cyanide capsule the night before his scheduled execution on October 15, 1946. The Reichsmarschall, who had promised to defend Germany's skies, died by his own hand, just like the Führer he'd served. Adolf Galland, the fighter ace who replaced him, surrendered to Allied forces on May 14, 1945. He was never charged with war crimes. He spent 2 years in Allied custody, then was released. He later became a consultant for the Argentine Air Force, teaching jet tactics. In the 1960s, he returned to Germany and worked as an aviation consultant. He died in 1996 at age 83, one of the last living links to the Luftwaffe's glory days. And what happened to the American side of this story? North American Aviation's Inglewood plant built its last P-51 Mustang in November 1945. Total production, 15,186 aircraft in under 4 years. That facility later produced the F-86 Sabre jet fighter, the X-15 rocket plane, and Apollo spacecraft components. The workers who built Mustangs in 1944 built moon rockets in 1968. Same plant, same American ingenuity. Mary Sullivan, the riveter from Kansas City we mentioned earlier, left aircraft manufacturing in 1946. She married a returning B-17 pilot. She rarely talked about her wartime service. When her grandson asked about building P-51s, she said, "We just did our jobs, didn't think we were doing anything special. Just building what the boys needed." That's the greatest generation in a sentence. Building what the boys needed, just duty. Executed with excellence. The Packard plant in Detroit that built Merlin engines converted back to luxury automobile production in 1946. But financial difficulties led to the company's demise in 1958. The factory where they'd built 55,000 Merlin engines was demolished in 1961. Today, it's a light industrial park. There's a small historical marker noting that this was once the site of one of America's greatest wartime industrial achievements. Most people drive past without noticing. But the legacy lives on, in ways both obvious and subtle. The manufacturing techniques developed to mass-produce P-51s were later applied to commercial aircraft production. The quality control processes created to ensure fighter reliability became industry standards. The precision machining capabilities developed for Merlin engines influenced post-war automotive and aerospace engineering. The P-51 Mustang itself lived on for decades. Many were sold as surplus after the war. Some were converted for civilian racing, where they dominated unlimited air racing competitions. Military P-51s served in combat in Korea, flown by US forces and South Korean pilots. Some air forces operated Mustangs into the 1980s. Indonesia didn't retire its last operational P-51 until 1976, 31 years after the war ended. Today, approximately 150 P-51 Mustangs remain airworthy. They appear at air shows worldwide. The sound of that Merlin engine is instantly recognizable to aviation enthusiasts. The sight of a Mustang in flight is a living connection to the generation that saved the world. And when you see one at an air show, remember this story. Remember 7:42 a.m., April 23, 1945. Remember the intelligence report that landed on Hitler's desk. Remember the production numbers that ended a career and sealed a regime's fate. Remember that this aircraft, built by 19-year-old factory workers in California and powered by engines from a luxury car company in Detroit, helped defeat the most powerful military machine in European history, 300 per month, every month, for 2 years. Built by free workers in a democratic nation, flown by volunteer pilots defending freedom, escorting bombers that destroyed the industrial capacity of a fascist regime, winning the air war through mathematics and manufacturing. That's not just history. That's the American story. The story of a nation that could produce miracles when freedom demanded it. The story of everyday people achieving extraordinary things because the cause was just and the need was great. The P-51 Mustang is beautiful because it works. It works because it was built right. It was built right because American workers and engineers and manufacturers cared about the men who would fly it into combat. That care, that quality, that commitment to excellence, saved lives and won a war. This is the history worth remembering. This is the legacy worth preserving. This is why your freedom flies on these wings. Team P-51 or Team P-47? Which American fighter do you think had the biggest impact on the air war? Drop your thoughts below and let's honor both.